May I, may I play for food? The timid voice of a 12-year-old girl sliced through the glamorous noise of the Crystal Hall inside the Imperial Hotel. Laughter, champagne glasses clinking, and the hum of polite conversation froze all at once. Dozens of wealthy eyes turned toward the entrance, where a small figure stood, holding a worn-out backpack against her chest like a shield. Her name was Amelia Washington, though nobody there knew it yet. Her clothes were too big for her thin body, her shoes scuffed and almost falling apart. But what struck everyone wasn't her appearance, it was where her gaze landed. She wasn't staring at the buffet tables or the trays of hors d'oeuvres floating around on silver platters. Her eyes were fixed on the grand piano, glowing under the chandelier like a jewel. "Who let that child in here?" whispered a woman in a diamond necklace, clutching her glass a little tighter. "Where's security?" hissed another man, shaking his head. The irony, of course, was brutal. This was a charity gala for underprivileged youth. People had paid thousands of dollars for tickets, sipping champagne while pretending to care about children in need. Yet here stood a real child in need, one brave enough to interrupt their polished world, and they wanted her thrown out. Amelia didn't flinch. Her voice, though quiet, carried unexpected strength. "I just want to play one song in exchange for something to eat." A ripple of laughter spread across the room. "She thinks she can play piano," a man in a navy suit smirked. "Probably doesn't even know which key is middle C." "It's cute," another woman said, pretending pity. "These kids watch a movie once and think they're prodigies." But Amelia didn't lower her eyes. There was something in her posture, calm, dignified, almost defiant, that unsettled a few people in the back. She wasn't begging, she was offering. At that moment, Dr. Robert Chun, a world-renowned pianist and one of the evening's guests of honor, noticed her. He had seen hundreds of children approach a piano before, but there was something different in the way she looked at it, like she already knew its secrets. He leaned toward the event organizer, Victoria Sterling, a woman whose fortune and arrogance walked hand in hand. "Victoria," he murmured, "maybe we should let her try. Isn't this event about giving young people a chance?" Victoria tilted her head back and laughed, a sharp, crystalline laugh that carried across the hall. "Robert, darling, please. Look at her. Children like this don't get piano lessons. It's impossible." But Amelia stayed rooted to the spot, her hands twitching slightly, as if already playing an invisible melody only she could hear. The guests expected security to drag her out at any moment. What they didn't know was that a storm was about to break in the middle of their comfortable evening, and that this little girl, with nothing but courage in her voice and music in her veins, was about to change everything they thought they knew about talent, dignity, and truth. Victoria Sterling stepped forward, heels clicking against the marble floor like a judge entering her courtroom. All eyes followed her. She adored moments like this, when the entire room leaned in to watch her take control. "My dear," she said to Amelia with a syrupy smile, "if you insist on putting on a little show, then let's make it interesting." The crowd chuckled. They already sensed where this was going. Victoria raised one perfectly manicured finger. "First condition, you will play only one piece, and we will choose which one." She raised a second finger. "Second condition, if you manage to play it decently, I'll buy you a full dinner. But," she paused, savoring the moment, "when you fail miserably, as we all know you will leave this hall immediately and never disrupt respectable people again." Gasps came from the back. Someone muttered, "That's cruel," but their voice was drowned out by approving laughter from the front rows. Amelia stood completely still, her eyes locked on the piano. She didn't argue, she didn't beg. She simply whispered, "I accept." The quiet firmness in her voice made Dr. Chun lean forward. Something about the way this child carried herself. It was wrong. She didn't look like a beginner about to embarrass herself. She looked like someone preparing for a battle she knew how to fight. Victoria turned, scanning the crowd. "James, darling," she called to a man in a shiny navy jacket who often played piano at local cocktail bars. "What would be a suitable piece for our little guest?" James grinned. He enjoyed humiliating amateurs. "How about Beethoven's Für Elise?" he suggested loudly. "It's the one every beginner thinks they know. Let's see if she can even start it." The hall erupted in laughter. Everyone knew the piece. To outsiders, it was basic. But to perform it flawlessly, with the proper technique, required years of discipline. It was the perfect trap. If the girl had no training, she'd collapse after 2 notes. If she had only scraps of knowledge, she'd stumble and humiliate herself before everyone. "Excellent choice!" Victoria clapped dramatically. "A song every child has tried at least once. No excuses, no hiding." The piano bench gleamed under the spotlight as Amelia walked toward it. Each step was small, yet carried an odd weight, like she was moving through invisible resistance. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Why did such a fragile-looking child carry herself with that kind of dignity? When she reached the instrument, Amelia slid her backpack to the floor and adjusted the bench. Not casually, not like she was guessing. She made precise, practiced movements. Back straight, shoulders down, hands hovering above the keys with classical form. Dr. Chun felt a chill down his spine. Those aren't the movements of a beginner, he thought. Victoria, however, smirked to her nearest guests. "Look at her. She doesn't even know how to sit properly. This will be over in seconds." But Amelia's hands stayed poised above the keyboard as if she was already inside the music. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering 1,000 hours of invisible practice. In her mind, she could almost hear her grandmother's soft voice. "When people try to belittle you, Amelia, let the music speak. It knows no prejudice. It only knows truth." The crowd leaned in. They were ready for a spectacle, a laugh, a failure. What they didn't know was that Amelia was about to give them something else entirely. Amelia closed her eyes for a brief second. Her small chest rose and fell, steadying itself against the ocean of judgment pressing down on her. Then, with a quiet exhale, she let her fingers fall onto the keys. The very first note rang out, clear, pure, perfectly balanced. It wasn't the clumsy plink everyone expected. It wasn't hesitant or weak. It was confident, resonant, alive. So precise that several heads in the crowd instinctively tilted, surprised. One note. That was all it took to shift the atmosphere. Dr. Chun leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That attack, that sustain, impossible for an untrained child. Victoria laughed nervously. "Coincidence," she muttered under her breath. "Anyone can hit one nice note." But then came the second, the third, the fourth. The opening of Für Elise flowed like water from Amelia's hands. Each phrase shaped with elegance, each pause breathing naturally as though the music itself was speaking through her. The room fell silent. Champagne flutes hovered midair. Waiters froze with trays balanced. No one wanted to move. No one wanted to break whatever spell this girl had cast. Her fingers danced effortlessly, running through passages that stumped even trained teenagers. The delicate melody sang above the murmuring accompaniment like a voice filled with longing and grace. And yet, beneath the beauty, there was strength, an unshakable confidence born not of privilege, but of survival. Dr. Chun felt his heart racing. In 3 decades of judging competitions, he'd heard countless prodigies,
5-year-olds who could rattle off Mozart, teenagers who could crush Rachmaninoff with technical fire. But this was different. This wasn't just technique, it was soul. It was lived pain, joy, loss, and resilience pouring into the keys. "Impossible," whispered James, the pianist who had suggested the trap. His smug grin was gone. She's phrasing like a professional." Victoria forced another laugh, louder this time, trying to reassert control. "Oh, please. Kids memorize things from YouTube all the time. She's just copying." But the excuse fell flat. Everyone could feel it. Amelia wasn't copying. She was interpreting. Bending the melody, shaping the silence, letting every note breathe with meaning. That wasn't imitation. That was artistry. And then came the descent, the arpeggios that cascaded like waterfalls, each note precise, shimmering, perfectly timed. Not rushed, not sloppy, controlled, refined. A woman near the front gasped softly. A man dropped his glass, forgotten, onto the carpet. Amelia was no longer a hungry girl in oversized clothes. In that moment, she was a vessel of music itself, commanding the room, making the piano her voice. Victoria's smile faltered. For the first time all evening, a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. This wasn't going according to her plan. She wanted humiliation, but what was unfolding in front of her was something entirely different, something she could not control. And as Amelia's small hands moved with grace and certainty, a question began to ripple through the stunned crowd. Who was this girl, really? As Amelia's fingers glided across the ivory keys, something deeper than sound filled the hall. It wasn't just notes, it was memory. Every phrase seemed to carry a shadow of someone who wasn't there. Inside her mind, the ballroom dissolved. She wasn't in a glittering hotel anymore. She was back in her grandmother's small living room.
Sitting on a creaky wooden bench, the air heavy with the smell of old sheet music and lavender oil. Her grandmother, Betty Washington, sat beside her, skin weathered but eyes shining with fire. Betty's hands, strong from decades of teaching, yet tender when they touched Amelia's, guided her little fingers over an ancient upright piano. "Listen, my dear," Betty would whisper, her voice both stern and gentle. "Music is not about hitting the right notes. Anyone can do that. Music is about truth. When you play, you're telling the world who you are." Amelia had learned every scale, every chord, not as a drill, but as a language. Betty taught her that Chopin was longing, Beethoven was struggle, Mozart was laughter. And she taught Amelia that her own music, born from her own life, was just as worthy. For 8 years, Amelia absorbed not just lessons, but a world view. A belief that the piano was more than wood and strings. It was a voice that could speak when no one else would listen. Then came the day everything shattered. Betty was gone, taken suddenly by a heart attack. And with her death, Amelia was thrown into the foster system, stripped from the home where music had been her anchor. The piano was gone, the lessons were gone, the world turned cold. But the music never left her. In shelters, lying awake at night on thin mattresses, she would move her fingers in the air, practicing on invisible keys. Each imaginary concert was a lifeline, keeping her grandmother's voice alive. Now, in this gilded hall, surrounded by people who had dismissed her as nothing, every ounce of that buried training and love came rushing back. Each note she played wasn't just Beethoven, it was Betty. It was memory transformed into sound. Dr. Chun, watching closely, felt a strange heaviness in his chest. The precision of her pedaling, the way she shaped phrases, the emotional maturity, none of this belonged to a child with no training. This was legacy. This was the result of a true master passing down her art. Amelia's hands floated into the most challenging passage of the piece. Arpeggios tumbled down like rain, each one clear as crystal, her small body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The hall held its breath. They expected her to falter here, to collapse under the weight of the music. She didn't. Instead, she soared. The cascade of notes shimmered with grace, as though her grandmother's spirit had taken hold of her hands. And at that moment, even the harshest skeptic in the crowd felt it. The undeniable truth that what they were witnessing was more than talent. It was survival. It was inheritance. It was a story told in sound, impossible to silence. Victoria Sterling clenched her jaw, her painted smile trembling. This was no accident. This was no trick. Something much larger was unfolding before her, and for the first time, she couldn't laugh it away. The melody swelled, rising like a tide that could no longer be contained. Amelia's fingers danced across the keys with a fluency that defied reason. Her thin arms moved gracefully, her posture unshaken, her expression lost in a world only she could see. Then came the climax, the moment where the piece demanded everything from the performer. For most beginners, it was a battlefield of missed notes and clumsy rhythms. But Amelia? She transformed it into flight. The arpeggios cascaded like silver waterfalls, flawless and controlled. The melody returned with power, her hands pulling the piano's voice into something almost human. Every person in the hall felt it in their chest, some with awe, others with disbelief, but none could deny it. When the final chords came, Amelia didn't slam them like a child desperate for attention. She caressed them, delicate, controlled, whispering the ending as though the piano itself were breathing its last sigh. The sound lingered in the air like smoke, refusing to vanish. Then silence. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that weighs more than sound. The hall, filled with people who had laughed minutes earlier, was now frozen. Waiters stood still, trays suspended mid-air. Guests leaned forward, afraid even to breathe, as though exhaling too soon might shatter the fragile magic Amelia had just woven. She kept her hands above the keys for a moment, eyes still closed, savoring the last vibrations. Then slowly she lowered them into her lap and turned toward the crowd. What they saw wasn't a timid child begging for food. It was an artist, calm, dignified, claiming her place in a world that had tried to push her out. The first clap came from the back, Dr. Chun. He rose to his feet, his applause echoing like a drum. His eyes glistened, and for once words failed him. Soon another joined, and then another. Within seconds, the hall thundered with applause. Some clapped out of respect, others out of shame, but all clapped because silence had become impossible. Amelia didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply sat there, letting the storm of hands wash over her.
For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, felt her stomach twist. This was not the scene she had orchestrated. Instead of a humiliating spectacle, she had given the girl a stage. And now the crowd, her crowd, was slipping from her control. She forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Well," she said loudly, trying to rise above the applause, "it seems the little darling memorized a few notes after all. Clever trick." But no one laughed this time. No one looked at her. All eyes were fixed on Amelia, who sat in silence, her dignity filling the room in a way no amount of money could buy. Dr. Chun stepped closer, his voice carrying over the applause. "Child," he said gently, "may I ask, who taught you to play like this?" Amelia looked him straight in the eye. For a heartbeat, the weight of all her years,
All her losses, all her nights of silent practice in the dark, passed through her gaze. Then she answered simply, "My grandmother." And with those two words, the applause only grew louder. The applause roared on, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Some guests clapped with genuine awe, others with an uncomfortable guilt gnawing at their hearts. Amelia sat quietly, her back straight, her small hands resting calmly in her lap. Dr. Robert Chun stepped forward, drawn as if by gravity. His voice trembled, not from pity, but from reverence. "Child, what is your full name?" For the first time since she had walked into the room, Amelia allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. She raised her chin and said clearly, "Amelia Washington." The name hit Dr. Chun like a thunderclap. His breath caught, his eyes widened. He staggered back a step, as though the floor itself had tilted beneath him. "Washington? My God, Betty Washington. Are you her granddaughter?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Some gasped softly, others whispered to their neighbors. The name carried weight, a ghost of history lingering in musical circles. "Yes," Amelia replied softly. "She was my grandmother. She was my teacher." Dr. Chun's hand rose to his mouth. His voice cracked with emotion. "Betty Washington was a genius, one of the finest pianists I ever encountered. She should have stood on the world's grandest stages, but—" He trailed off, his face shadowed with old sorrow. Doors were closed to her because of her color. The room stiffened. Even those who didn't know Betty could feel the gravity of his words. Victoria Sterling frowned, irritation rising like bile. "Robert, really? You're speaking as if this legend is common knowledge. I've never heard of this woman in my life." Dr. Chun turned to her sharply, his usual composure gone. "That's because you've lived your life in a bubble of privilege, Victoria. Betty Washington was denied the spotlight she deserved, but she became one of the most respected teachers in this country. Musicians whispered her name like a secret. She trained dozens of professionals. Her talent shaped generations." More murmurs. Heads nodded. A few guests whispered that they had indeed once heard of a Washington who taught in the shadows of the city's music halls. Victoria scoffed, her laugh thin and defensive. "Even if what you say is true, it doesn't change the fact that this girl barged into a private event. She doesn't belong here." And that was when Amelia rose. Slowly, deliberately, she stood from the bench, her presence commanding in a way no child should be able to be. The submissive air she had carried when she entered was gone. In its place was dignity, quiet but unshakable. "Miss Sterling," Amelia said, her voice firm, steady, cutting through the air like a bow on a string, "you're right about one thing." The crowd leaned in. Even the clinking glasses stopped. "I don't belong here tonight." She let the silence hang, heavy and deliberate. Then her words landed with the force of a hammer. "I belong on the stage at Carnegie Hall, where I have a recital scheduled next week." The room exploded in whispers. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, unable to believe what they'd heard. And Victoria Sterling felt the ground begin to crumble under her perfectly polished shoes. The ballroom erupted in disbelief. Guests whispered furiously, some laughing in denial, others clutching their pearls as if Amelia's words had personally struck them. Carnegie Hall? A recital? Surely it was a bluff. Surely this ragged girl was exaggerating. But Amelia's calm never wavered. She looked straight at Victoria, her eyes burning with a quiet fire. "I'm not here tonight because I need food," she said. Her voice carried effortlessly through the hall. I'm here because the world needs to see what really happens when people like me walk into rooms like this." A wave of unease swept across the crowd. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone muttered, "What does she mean by that?" Dr. Chun's eyes widened as the pieces began to click together.
You're filming, aren't you?" Amelia nodded once. "Yes, this is part of a documentary project. Every moment that's happened tonight has been captured. The way I was dismissed, the way I was mocked, the way you all laughed before I even touched the piano." Gasps exploded like firecrackers. Guests spun around, scanning the chandeliers, the corners of the room, searching for cameras. And then they remembered the fine print on their tickets, the disclaimer they had all ignored. The event could be recorded for media purposes. "You can't do this," Victoria shouted, her composure cracking. "This is illegal. None of us consented to being filmed." "Oh, but you did," Amelia replied calmly. "Every guest signed it the moment they entered. It was written clearly on your ticket. You just didn't bother to read." Panic spread like wildfire. The same people who had smirked and sneered minutes ago now looked pale, tugging at their collars, whispering frantically to one another. "The first part of this documentary," Amelia continued, her voice steady and strong, "shows how talent and potential are dismissed when they come in a package that doesn't fit your expectations. The second part shows what happens when those same people are confronted with undeniable truth." She let the silence settle, scanning the room. "Congratulations. Tonight, you all showed the world exactly who you are." Victoria's hands trembled. Her flawless facade was crumbling before everyone's eyes. No, this isn't happening," she stammered. But Amelia wasn't finished. "My last documentary reached over 2 million people online. This one will reach even more, because the truth is powerful. And tonight, the truth has been recorded." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. A few guests were already pulling out their phones, desperate to confirm, to see if the story had already gone public. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Amelia, the girl who had walked in asking to play for food, now stood as the one person in the room holding all the control. The once glittering ballroom now felt like a cage. Guests who had strutted proudly in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos suddenly looked like children caught doing something shameful. The weight of exposure pressed heavily on them, and no amount of money could shield them from what Amelia had just revealed. And at the center of it all stood Victoria Sterling, her face pale beneath layers of makeup. Her carefully curated smile had vanished, replaced by something raw: fear. Amelia turned toward her, slowly, deliberately. Her voice was calm, but every word struck like a hammer. "Miss Sterling, tonight you told me, and everyone here, that I don't belong. That people like me have no right to stand in a place like this. That I should accept scraps instead of dignity." The crowd shifted uneasily. A few lowered their eyes. They had laughed. They had agreed. And now every second of it was on record. "But here's the truth," Amelia continued, her gaze locked on Victoria. "What you said tonight wasn't just about me. It was about every child who dreams, every voice you silence, every door you close because of skin or class or the shoes on their feet. And now," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "now the world will hear exactly who you are." Victoria shook her head, her words tumbling out clumsily. "You don't understand. This is taken out of context. I was only protecting the integrity of the event. This is charity work. I give so much of myself." "Charity?" Amelia shaved off her excuses, slicing through Victoria's. "Charity is not about feeding your pride. It's about lifting others. But you weren't feeding anyone tonight. You were feeding on humiliation."
The words landed like a slap. Gasps rippled across the hall. Dr. Chun stepped closer, his voice firm. "Enough, Victoria. We all saw it. You tried to make a child into a spectacle, and she answered you with art." A man near the back spoke up, his voice heavy with shame. "She's right. We all laughed. We all joined in." The admission cracked something open. Murmurs swelled. Guests exchanged guilty glances, no longer able to hide behind Victoria's authority. Victoria, desperate, turned to the crowd. "Don't you see? This is a trick! She manipulated us! This whole thing was a setup!" But her protest sounded hollow. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. No trick could create what they had just heard from that piano. No scam could manufacture the raw beauty Amelia had unleashed. Amelia stepped forward, her small frame commanding the stage like a queen. "The difference between you and me, Miss Sterling, is simple. You have money, but no music. I have music, even when I have nothing else. And tonight, the world will see which one truly matters."
In her life, Victoria Sterling felt what it was like to be utterly powerless. The chaos of that night did not end in the ballroom. By morning, it had spilled onto every screen. The footage, clean, high definition, impossible to deny, appeared on YouTube first. Within hours, it was everywhere. The thumbnail alone was enough to draw millions. A small girl in ragged clothes at a golden piano, her eyes closed, fingers poised midair. The title read, "They laughed at her until she played." It exploded. Shares, comments, reaction videos. People across the world watched as Amelia entered that ballroom, faced ridicule, and then shattered it with music. They watched Victoria Sterling laugh, sneer, and humiliate herself. And they saw a wealthy crowd exposed as hypocrites during an event supposedly dedicated to helping underprivileged youth. By the end of the week, the video had tens of millions of views. Major networks replayed clips, talk shows debated it. Social media turned Victoria's name into a hashtag synonymous with elitist cruelty. Victoria Sterling's empire collapsed overnight. Her charity board voted her out. Sponsors cut ties. Clients fled from her event company, terrified of being associated with her name. The same social circle that once adored her now avoided her like a stain they couldn't scrub out. The Imperial Hotel, desperate to save face, announced a new scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians. They called it the Washington Initiative, named after Amelia's grandmother. And they didn't just announce it, they asked Amelia herself to become its first ambassador. Dr. Chun took Amelia under his wing, not as a charity case, but as a student worthy of the world's stages. He guided her carefully, ensuring the spotlight didn't burn her before she was ready. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Amelia had someone in her corner again. And the ripple effect went far beyond her own life. Across the country, conservatories began reevaluating admissions policies. Community programs for music education multiplied. Teachers volunteered to mentor children who would never have dreamed of touching a Steinway. Everywhere, doors that had been bolted shut for kids like Amelia began to creak open. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone in her apartment, blinds drawn against the cameras camped outside. Headlines screamed her downfall. Charity queen exposed as hypocrite. She scrolled through the flood of comments, each one another stone on her chest. The irony was suffocating. Her obsession with status had destroyed the very status she craved. But Amelia? She was no longer the hungry girl asking to play for food. She was the face of something bigger, a movement proving that real art, real talent, real dignity could rise from anywhere. And yet, her journey was not finished. The true test was still ahead, waiting on the stage of Carnegie Hall. 6 months later, the cold evening air of New York City shimmered with excitement. Outside Carnegie Hall, a long line of people wrapped around the block. Students clutching cheap tickets, music critics scribbling in notebooks, families bringing children who now dreamed of pianos instead of street corners. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed. The name on the marquee glowed in golden letters, Amelia Washington, Piano Recital.
Inside a black limousine parked near the curb, Amelia sat quietly, wearing a simple but elegant gown. Her hands rested on her lap, calm, steady. She wasn't thinking about fame or fear. She was thinking about Betty, her grandmother's voice, her lessons, her laughter echoing like a heartbeat. When she stepped out, the crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, even tears. Amelia waved softly, humbled, then walked into the hall that had once seemed like an unreachable dream. The stage lights rose, the murmur of the audience stilled. Amelia crossed the wooden floor, each step echoing in history. She sat at the piano, not as a guest, not as a child begging for food, but as the youngest soloist of the season. Her fingers touched the keys. And then, music. Pure, radiant, alive, flooded the hall. It wasn't just Beethoven or Chopin that night. It was Amelia's story woven into every note. It was nights in shelters, invisible keyboards in the dark, the laughter of a grandmother who believed when the world didn't. And the audience listened not with their ears, but with their souls. Many wept openly. Critics dropped their pens. Even the most hardened skeptics rose to their feet long before the final chord faded. Back in her small apartment, far from the glitter, Victoria Sterling watched the live broadcast on television. The glow of the screen painted her face in pale light. She saw Amelia bow, heard the roar of Carnegie Hall lifting the girl higher than Victoria could ever dream. And in that moment, she understood the most painful truth. Her cruelty had built the very stage from which Amelia now shone.
Changing policies, inspiring thousands, and branding Victoria's name as a permanent warning of hypocrisy. Amelia, on the other hand, had become a symbol of something bigger than herself, a reminder that true greatness cannot be bought, silenced, or denied. When the final ovation thundered, Amelia rose, bowed deeply, and whispered into the microphone. Music knows no color, no social class, no address. It only knows truth and passion. And when you carry those, no barrier can ever hold you back. The hall exploded, not just in applause, but in belief. And with that, the little girl who once asked, "May I play for food?" had given the world a feast of something far greater: dignity, hope, and the proof that talent born in silence can shake the loudest rooms.